The studio lights burned hotter than the sun, but Marcus Tate was sweating for a different reason. The host, Richard Vance, had just sneered, "So, what's it like being the token success story for your kind?" The audience gasped, a collective inhale that sucked the air from the room. Marcus, a black entrepreneur who'd clawed his way from a crumbling apartment in Detroit to a tech empire worth millions, felt his pulse hammer in his temples. He wasn't here to be anyone's punching bag. Not tonight. Not on live television with millions watching. The set of Prime Talk was a glitzy cage, polished floors, gleaming desks, and a backdrop of city lights that screamed prestige. But the real spotlight was on Marcus, his tailored navy suit crisp against his dark skin. His eyes locked on Vance like a predator sizing up prey. The host, a man whose career thrived on provocation, leaned back in his chair, smirking, oblivious to the storm he'd just unleashed. Marcus had spent years preparing for moments like this. Growing up, he'd navigated a world that judged him before he spoke, teachers who assumed he'd fail, cops who eyed him like a threat, neighbors who whispered when he walked by. He'd turned that scrutiny into fuel, building a tech startup that revolutionized affordable housing solutions. His app, Homebase, connected low-income families with resources, cutting through red tape with ruthless efficiency. It was a game changer, and it had landed him on this stage. But Vance didn't care about that. To him, Marcus was just another headline, another chance to stir the pot. "So," Vance pressed, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're saying you built this app all by yourself? No handouts, no special programs." The implication hung heavy. Marcus couldn't possibly have succeeded without charity. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the line Vance had crossed. Marcus leaned forward, his hands steady on the desk, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "Let me make this clear, Richard. I didn't build Homebase because of handouts. I built it despite people like you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vance's smirk faltered, but he doubled down, his face reddening. "Oh, come on, Marcus. Don't play the victim card. We all know how these stories go: affirmative action, diversity quotas. You're here because someone gave you a leg up, right?" The studio fell silent, the kind of quiet that feels like the world holding its breath. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his eyes burned with a fire that could have lit the room. He'd faced worse than Vance: bankers who laughed him out of meetings, investors who questioned his background, competitors who spread rumors he was a front for someone else. But this was personal. This was a man with a microphone trying to erase his life's work in front of a nation. "I'm here," Marcus said, his voice rising, each word a hammer striking steel, "because I worked harder than you could ever imagine. Because I coded through nights when my family couldn't pay the electric bill. Because I believed in something bigger than your cheap shots." Vance scoffed, but it was weaker now, like a man realizing he'd misjudged his opponent. "Sounds like a nice story, Marcus. But let's be real. Your community, well, it's not exactly known for innovation, is it?" The audience erupted, some booing, others shouting in protest. A woman in the front row stood, her face a mask of outrage. Marcus raised a hand, not to calm the crowd but to hold his ground. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "Let's talk about my community, Richard," he said, his voice steady but laced with an edge that made the host flinch. "My community is the one you drive through with your windows up. The one you write off without a second thought. But those are the people who inspired Homebase families fighting to survive. Mothers working 3 jobs. Kids dreaming despite the odds. You don't get to define them. You don't get to define me." The crowd roared, a wave of applause that shook the studio. Vance's face twisted, caught between anger and panic. He was losing control, and he knew it. The producer in the control booth was frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the cameras stayed rolling. America was watching, and they weren't looking away. Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor, a sound that echoed like a gunshot. You want to talk about handouts? Let's talk about the privilege you've ridden your whole career. The trust funds, the connections, the second chances you got without earning them. I didn't have that. I had me, and that was enough. Vance opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his career, the man who'd made a fortune tearing people down was speechless. The audience was on its feet now, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't bask in the moment. He just stared at Vance, his gaze unwavering. A man who'd spent his life proving himself and wasn't about to stop now. Backstage, the mood was chaos. Producers scrambled, yelling into headsets about damage control. The show's social media accounts were exploding. Hashtags like Marcus Tate and Vance Takedown trending within minutes. Clips of the exchange were already going viral, shared by people who'd never met Marcus but felt his words in their bones. As the show cut to commercial, Marcus walked off the set, his steps deliberate, his head high. He didn't need to look back to know he'd changed something tonight. Not just for himself, but for everyone watching who'd ever been dismissed, stereotyped, or underestimated. The next day, the headlines screamed, "Black entrepreneur destroys TV host in epic takedown." Blogs dissected every word, every glance. Pundits debated whether Vance's career could survive. But Marcus wasn't reading the headlines. He was back in his office, a modest space in Detroit's tech district, surrounded by his team, Black, white, Latino, Asian, all united by a shared mission. Homebase was growing, with new partnerships flooding in after the broadcast. The world had seen Marcus Tate, not as a token anything, but as a force. Yet the victory felt hollow. Marcus knew one TV appearance wouldn't dismantle the systems that had tried to hold him back his entire life. The calls started coming: talk show invites, magazine features, even a book deal. But he wasn't interested in fame. He wanted change. Real change. The kind that lifted up the kids in his old neighborhood, the ones still dodging the same stereotypes he'd faced. That night, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, the city's lights glittering through his window. He thought of his mother, who'd worked double shifts to keep him in school, who'd told him, "They'll try to make you small, but you're bigger than their lies." He thought of the faces in the audience, the ones who'd stood for him, who'd seen themselves in his fight. He opened his laptop, pulling up Homebase's user data. Thousands of families had signed up since the broadcast, their stories flooding the platform: single parents, veterans, immigrants, all looking for a chance to build a better life. Marcus smiled, a quiet, determined smile. This was why he'd fought. Not for the applause, not for the viral moment, but for them. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his sister, Aisha, her voice trembling with pride. "Marcus, you did it. You showed them." "I didn't do it for them," he said softly. "I did it for us." Aisha laughed, a sound that carried years of shared struggle. "Well, you made us proud. Mom's probably dancing in heaven right now." Marcus chuckled, but his eyes stung. He could almost see his mother, her hands on her hips, saying, "Told you, boy, you're unstoppable." The conversation shifted to plans for the weekend, but Marcus's mind was already racing ahead. The world was watching now, and he had work to do, not just for himself, but for every kid who'd been told they weren't enough, every dreamer who'd been boxed in by someone else's prejudice. The next morning, Marcus walked into a meeting with a major investor, a billionaire known for backing transformative projects. The man, an older white guy with a reputation for bluntness, stood to shake his hand. "Saw you on TV," he said, a glint in his eye. "You've got guts, Tate. But can you deliver?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I've been delivering my whole life. Question is, can you keep up?" The room laughed, but the investor's eyes narrowed, assessing. Marcus didn't care. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to build. Over the next few weeks, Homebase exploded. Partnerships with nonprofits poured in, and cities across the country wanted to integrate the app into their housing programs. Marcus hired more staff, prioritizing people from underserved communities, giving them the chance he'd fought for. But the hate came two roles online, letters accusing him of playing the race card, even threats that made his team install extra security. Through it all, Marcus kept his focus. He spoke at schools, sharing his story with kids who looked like him, telling them they could be more than the world expected. He mentored young entrepreneurs, teaching them to navigate the barriers he'd faced. And he never stopped coding, tweaking Homebase to make it faster, smarter, better. One evening, as he left his office, a young woman approached him. She was maybe 20, her eyes nervous but bright. "Mr. Tate, I saw you on Prime Talk. I am trying to start my own business, but people keep telling me I can't because of where I'm from." Marcus stopped, his heart catching. He saw himself in her, the doubt, the fire, the hunger to prove them wrong. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said, clutching a notebook filled with sketches. "Lila, listen to me. They'll always tell you you can't. But you don't need their permission. You build it anyway. And when they see what you've done, they'll have no choice but to listen." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and Marcus handed her his card. "Send me your pitch. I'll take a look." As she walked away, Marcus felt a weight lift. This was his purpose, not just breaking barriers, but building bridges for others to cross. Back in the studio, Richard Vance's career was unraveling. The backlash had been swift and brutal. Sponsors pulled out, viewers boycotted, and his network issued a half-hearted apology that only fueled the fire. Vance tried to spin it, claiming he'd been misunderstood, but the internet wasn't buying it. Clips of Marcus's takedown played on repeat, a reminder of the moment truth had won. Marcus didn't watch the fallout. He didn't need to. He was too busy building a future, one where no one could be dismissed with a smirk and a stereotype. And as Homebase grew, so did his vision. A world where opportunity wasn't a privilege, but a right. Marcus Tate's life didn't slow down after the Prime Talk showdown. If anything, it accelerated, a freight train of purpose barreling through obstacles that would have stopped lesser men. His office, once a quiet hub of coders and dreamers, now buzzed with energy, new hires, partnership calls, and a flood of emails from people inspired by his words. Homebase was no longer just an app. It was a movement, a lifeline for communities long ignored. But with growth came pressure, and Marcus felt it in every late-night meeting, every skeptical investor, every headline that tried to reduce him to that guy who owned Vance. The weeks following the broadcast were a whirlwind. Marcus's team expanded, bringing in talent from neighborhoods like the one he'd grown up in, place where potential was often buried under prejudice. He hired Lila, the young woman who'd approached him outside his office, as a junior designer. Her sketches, raw but brilliant, shaped Homebase's new user interface, making it more intuitive for families navigating the app. Watching her thrive, Marcus felt a quiet pride, the kind that came from seeing someone else break through the same walls he'd faced. But not everyone was cheering. The trolls multiplied, their venom spilling across social media. "Marcus Tate is a fraud," one post read, racking up thousands of likes. "Just another race baiter cashing in." Anonymous accounts spread lies about Homebase's funding, claiming it was a front for shady deals. Marcus ignored most of it, but the threats grew, darker voicemails promising violence, letters with no return address. His team installed cameras and hired a security guard, a hulking man named Jamal who'd grown up 2 blocks from Marcus's old apartment. "We got you, boss," Jamal said, his voice a low rumble of loyalty. Marcus nodded, but the weight of it all pressed harder. One night, alone in his office, Marcus scrolled through Homebase's user stories. A single mother in Chicago had found stable housing through the app, her kids now in a safer school. A veteran in Atlanta wrote, "You gave me a reason to keep going." These were the voices that kept him grounded, the ones that drowned out the hate. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and thought of his mother's words. "You're bigger than their lies." But some days the lies felt louder than the truth. The investor meeting with the billionaire Charles Hargrove had been a turning point. Hargrove, a man who'd built his fortune in real estate, wasn't easily impressed. He'd grilled Marcus for hours, probing Homebase's scalability, its revenue model, its impact metrics. Marcus answered every question with data and conviction, his voice steady even when Hargrove's team threw curveballs. By the end, Hargrove leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You're not just selling an app, Tate. You're selling a vision. I'm in for $50 million. The deal was a game changer. With Hargrove's backing, Homebase could expand nationwide, reaching millions more families. Marcus's team celebrated, popping champagne in the office, but he slipped away early, needing air. He drove to his old neighborhood, parking outside the crumbling apartment where he'd grown up. The building was still there, paint peeling, windows boarded. Kids played basketball on a cracked court nearby, their laughter cutting through the dusk. Marcus watched them, remembering nights when he'd coded by flashlight, dreaming of a way out. Now he was building that way not just for himself but for them. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A rival company, Nexus Solutions, launched a smear campaign, accusing Homebase of exploiting vulnerable communities for profit. Their CEO, a slick Ivy Leaguer named Ethan Caldwell, went on cable news, painting Marcus as an opportunist. "Homebase is a feel-good story." "Sure," Caldwell said, smirking. "But let's ask the real questions. Who's really benefiting?" The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it echoed the same stereotypes Marcus had fought his whole life: distrust, suspicion, the assumption he couldn't be trusted. Marcus didn't respond publicly. Instead, he invited Caldwell to a public forum, a live-streamed event hosted by a neutral nonprofit. "Let's talk facts," Marcus wrote in the invitation. "No cameras, no spin, just the truth." Caldwell accepted, sensing a chance to outshine him. The forum, held in a packed community center in Detroit, was electric. Hundreds attended, from local activists to national reporters. Marcus arrived in a simple blazer, his presence commanding without trying. Caldwell, in a flashy suit, oozed confidence, but his polished charm faltered under scrutiny. Marcus opened with data. Homebase had housed 10,000 families in its first year, with 98% reporting improved stability. He shared stories like a grandmother in Oakland who'd avoided eviction thanks to the app. Then he turned to Caldwell. "You say we're exploiting people. Show me one family we've hurt. One name." Caldwell fumbled, tossing out vague claims about unsustainable models. The crowd grew restless, sensing his evasion. Marcus didn't let up. "You're not here to debate, Ethan. You're here to tear down what you can't build. My people deserve better than your sound bites." The room erupted in applause. Caldwell's face reddened, his arguments crumbling. By the end, even his own team looked deflated. The live stream went viral, with viewers praising Marcus's clarity and heart. Nexus's stock dipped, while Homebase's user base surged. But Marcus didn't savor the win. He was already planning the next phase. a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, funded by Hargrove's Investment. The program launched in Detroit, targeting kids from underserved neighborhoods. Marcus handpicked the first cohort, including a shy coder named Jamal and a fiery marketer named Keisha. He mentored them himself, teaching them to pitch, code, and navigate a world that wouldn't always welcome them. Watching them grow, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. This was legacy, not headlines, not viral moments, but real change. Meanwhile, Richard Vance's downfall continued. His show was canceled after sponsors fled, and his attempts at a comeback, a podcast, a blog, flopped. A leaked email showed him blaming Marcus for ruining his career, calling him an ungrateful thug. The email sparked outrage, but Marcus stayed silent. He didn't need to fight Vance anymore. The world had moved on. One evening, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was Vance, his voice slurred, desperate. "You happy now, Tate? You got what you wanted. I'm done." Marcus could have hung up, could have let the man stew in his failure. Instead, he said, "Richard, you're not done unless you choose to be. But you've got to own what you did. Start there." Vance hung up, and Marcus never heard from him again. But the call lingered, a reminder that even the worst could seek redemption, if they dared. Marcus didn't hate Vance. He pitied him, a man trapped by his own bitterness. As Homebase's second anniversary approached, Marcus planned a celebration, a block party in his old neighborhood. The event drew thousands, with food trucks, live music, and a stage where users shared their stories. Lila spoke, her voice steady as she described how Homebase had given her purpose. A single father from Flint told how the app saved his family from homelessness. The crowd cheered, their energy infectious. Marcus took the stage last, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This isn't my victory," he said. "It's ours. Every one of you who fought, who believed, who refused to be defined by someone else's lies, you built this." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces, black, white, young, old, all united. "They'll try to divide us, to tell us we're less. But we're more than their stereotypes. We're unstoppable." The crowd roared, a sound that echoed through the night. Marcus stepped down, joining his sister Aisha and her kids in the crowd. They danced to the music, laughing, free. For the first time in months, Marcus felt light, like the weight of the world wasn't his alone to carry. The next day, a major network offered Marcus his own show, a platform to discuss systemic issues like housing and inequality. He declined. "I'm not here to talk," he told them. "I'm here to build." Instead, he launched a home-based podcast, featuring users and activists, amplifying voices that rarely got airtime. The first episode, featuring Lila and a housing advocate, hit 1 million downloads in a week. Marcus's work wasn't done. He knew the systems that fueled prejudice were still there, embedded in policies, attitudes, and institutions. But he also knew change was possible not through anger, but through action. Homebase was proof. A tool born from struggle, now transforming lives. One night, as he walked through his old neighborhood, Marcus saw a mural on a brick wall. It was him, his face bold and determined, with the words "unstoppable" painted beneath. Kids played nearby, their laughter a reminder of why he'd started. He smiled, pulling out his phone to snap a photo. This was his win at fame, not revenge, but the chance to make a dent in a world that needed it. As Homebase grew, so did its impact. Cities adopted it as a model, and international NGOs reached out, wanting to replicate it. Marcus traveled, speaking at conferences, but always returned to Detroit, to the people who'd shaped him. He never forgot where he came from, and he never let the world forget either. The Prime Talk moment faded into history, but its ripples endured. Marcus Tate wasn't just a name. He was a symbol of what was possible when courage met purpose. He'd taken a stage meant to break him and turned it into a platform for truth. And in doing so, he'd left a nation speechless not with shock, but with awe. What do you think? Did Marcus's stand expose a deeper truth about justice, or did it widen the divide? Share your thoughts. Where do we go when the cameras stop rolling?